Okay, we're going to get rolling now. All of our attendees have signed in. A reminder of who the heck we are. We're out of Madison, Wisconsin. We are KW2, and we specialize in higher education marketing services. And that's just a sampling of the clients that we currently work with. And that's who this whole webinar series has been based around. It's higher education. It's 2 years, 4 years, private and public. And we are kind of joined today from countries from across, colleges from across the country. So it's great to have everybody here. Here's who's going to be leading it today. My name's Tim. I'm the Vice President of our digital services here. Allison Trapp and Claire Lemke are both Senior User Experience Designers, and we'll be talking today about understanding the value and calculating ROI. So number one and number two of our webinar have kind of led to this moment where in the first one we created and helped you understand how to establish a measurement plan. The second one, getting events and goals set up within analytics. So we could now lead to this point where it's now understanding what those goals and events are telling you through your analytics and how to establish the value of the clicks to your website. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Housekeeping note, you'll get an email after this that gives you a link to this Google presentation, so you'll be able to get that just about an hour after this presentation today. So, all right, let's get started. This is a view on screen right now of kind of your generic dashboard view, right? You guys have probably seen a lot of this where you open it up and you get, the acquisition channels down the left column there. Organic search, direct traffic, email traffic, referral traffic. And then we've got a couple of columns that we're showing here in terms of like how many users are coming in through those channels and then the behavior of those users. Now this is just a representative snapshot of a certain time frame, no client specific here, but just to show some numbers. And from this view, it might look like organic search, that's the highest raw number on that, right? Like 390. With a 28% bounce rate. That's not too bad, but if you just look at it with just those raw numbers, you might be missing the full picture. And so when we go to the next slide, the next view, sorry, I went too far. There, sorry. So now what we've got here is a slightly different picture. So you can see organic search, yes, okay, we've got the conversions in that third column, and our goal value for a conversion is $100 we've set. So we see that organic search has converted 8 to give you $800. But if you look a little further down in the number 3 and number 4 rows, you've got email traffic and also referral traffic that actually are valuable channels. Even though the raw numbers are lower, you have 47 referral raw numbers with this really low bounce rate of 22%. So that's a leading indicator that they actually might be doing something from an email channel. And lo and behold, look at that off to the third column, you see that we actually did get 2 conversions from that email. So even though the raw numbers might skew higher, make sure we layer on top of that the goals data that we set in place during the events and goals setup in analytics. Okay, so because that now gives you that view in analytics dashboard to layer on top of it to have your specific institution, organization's goals put on top of it. And what we're going to talk about today is actually adding that dollar amount that you see and trying to establish what's the value of these clicks and these visits to our website so that you as marketing or communications or as IT can report back to folks that are asking, what are our efforts getting us? Well, this is one indicator. Let's also be clear. The website is only one channel for gauging your ROI, right? Like there are other offsite and non-digital channels that you're tracking on. But this gives you a very specific view to what the website is doing for the organization's goals. So that's just kind of give you a baseline of what kind of a standard dashboard looks like, and then what it looks like when you layer on top of that the conversions and goals that you've set up. So as a reminder, we'll reference these 2 examples that we've used in the webinar. Number 1, organizational goal for Blackhawk Technical College was to increase applications for associate degree programs. And then our number 2 for a 4-year institution was for the College of Engineering and increasing awareness of their world-changing research. So we'll be referring to those throughout, so I want to remind us of those 2. And so we're going to dig in now and actually discuss how you can set up within analytics how to establish event and goal values. There's 2 different ways you can approach this, and Allison Trapp is now going to walk us through that. Allison.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim. So as Tim mentioned, there are 2 different ways to estimate those event and goal values. And there are also 2 parts of calculating your ROI or ROAS. So first, you need to understand how much an action on your website is actually worth. And then you need to determine how much investment it took to get that action. So Claire's going to cover the investment side of the equation, and I'm going to walk you through how to figure out how much a specific click on your site is worth. So as we mentioned, there are 2 different ways to do that. The first way, and this is really the way that we recommend, is to figure out the actual value of an event on the site to your organization. So it does require a little data, it does require a little math, but it's really the only way that you can get that true picture of ROI. If you can't do that, and there are some reasons why you might not be able to, and we'll go over those in a few minutes, you still want to create value. Creating a representative value can help you compare channels, can help you compare audiences. It still gives you more data than not adding value to your events at all. So let's start with our recommended method, which is actually finding the value of an action on the site. So you should remember this if you've been to either of our other webinars. It is the measurement plan for Blackhawk Technical College for one of their goals, which is increasing applications for their associate degree programs. Should look pretty familiar if you've been to any of these before. We're actually going to flip this over, and so now it looks a little bit more like a funnel. We've got our prospective student audience up on the top. We've got some actions they can take on the site, so some of those clicks on the site, macro and micro conversions, all leading up to that ultimate goal of getting an application for an associate degree program. I'm going to make it look even more like a funnel for our example, so you can see we've got our prospective students up on top and our ultimate action down at the bottom of the funnel. But that's actually not the final action in this example. Even though an application is as far as the user can go on the site itself, the ultimate value to the organization is actually enrollments. Blackhawk obviously doesn't get any revenue until a student actually enrolls. So we're going to keep that in mind for our example, and that may take place off-site in a CRM. It might take place in another off-site software, but it's definitely something that most of you probably aren't tracking through your Google Analytics. So we're going to keep that in mind for our funnel, knowing that there's going to be some drop-off from the site into enrollments. So for the purposes of our example today, we're actually going to talk about that campus tour click. So we know, Blackhawk knows that if a student takes a tour, they are a lot more likely to apply and ultimately enroll. So we're going to figure out how much a click to that link to request a tour is worth. So looking at our funnel, we've got our tour request email clicks down the side, our actual tour requests, so the ones that actually come through as an email, our total applications and enrollments. We're going to start with the numbers that we know. So we know Blackhawk has analytics set up on their site. They're tracking page views, they're tracking audiences, so they know what a prospective student visit looks like compared to a current student visit. And so we know we get about 250,000 prospective student visits. We also have event tracking set up. We set that up and we know how many people click on that tour request email. So that's 5,000. So we have 5,000 clicks on that. But we actually know from our enrollment office that we only get 4,000 emails. So there is some drop off because it's an email click that takes place in another program. So we really have a little bit of drop off there. About 1,000 people don't actually complete that email. We also know that we get 2,000 total applications and 1,000 enrollments. So we have those raw numbers. That might take a little bit of digging to get to. It might be something that you have to get from your CRM or from your Office of Admissions. So there might be some offline digging, but all of those numbers should be available to you. All right. So I'm just going to add our drop-off points here because we'll use those in our math equation that we're going to do next. So 2% of our total visits actually click on that tour request email, and there is an 80% drop-off between the number of people who click that and the number of people who actually submit a request, and a 50% drop-off between the number of tours requests and the number of total applications, and another 50% drop-off between applications and enrollments. So again, all numbers that you should have access to or be able to get access to from other members of your organization. So now we're going to take a look at value, and we're going to start with a number again that we know, and we're going to look at the opposite side. So we know that the lifetime value of an enrolled student is $20,000. So that's our ultimate value. We can get an enrolled student and keep them for their entire time. That's how much they're worth to us. Looking at our drop-off, that means that a completed application is worth about $10,000. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty high value action. Taking it a little bit further, that makes an actual tour request worth $5,000. So as we know, that's a high value action. People who take that tour are a lot more likely to end up applying. But we do have a little bit of drop off. So that means a click to that actual tour link on the site is worth $4,000. So I just want to say, for purposes of this, these are fictional numbers. This is just an example to give you an idea of what you might be looking at. Your numbers might be totally different. They might be lower. You might have higher drop off or lower drop off between different phases. But this is just a fictional example, so you can kind of see how this math works. Lastly, you can't really add a value to a site visit in Google Analytics. It's not one of the metrics that you can add a value to, but it's always a good idea to have kind of a sense of really what is a visit from a prospective student worth. So we're going to say with that 2% drop off, that's worth about $80 to us. So hopefully you can kind of see how that works. We look at the drop off between each step, and we take our real ultimate value that we know and work our way backwards. So that means our click here on that button or on that link is $4,000. Our completed application is $10,000, and our site visit is $80. So now we can really take those kind of less tangible on-site actions and give them a tangible value. So sometimes you're not going to be able to do this, and that's okay. You might not have as tangible of a goal. You might not have something that's directly tied to your enrollment funnel, or you may be missing a few pieces in the puzzle, and you just need to get a value in there so that you can compare channels. So creating a representative value is absolutely a great way to do it if you cannot get to that real value. And looking at our College of Engineering example, they don't have as tangible of a goal as Black Hawk. They want to create awareness of their research. Does that have a value to the organization? Absolutely. But it doesn't necessarily have a tangible value that they can say one person who's aware is worth X dollars. So this is a great scenario for a representative value. So again, we do have our funnel and our audience segment at the top, our organizational goal and ultimate value down at the bottom. And then we add in a representative value. So what we say here is every macro conversion, so that's every major conversion, is worth $100. And then we look at our micro conversions, and depending on how far away they are from the ultimate macro conversion, we give them that representative value that's lower. So for example, submitting an information request form, that's a pretty high value action. That might get a 75, an 80, a 90, because it's pretty close to that ultimate action of applying. But sharing a news story might be a little bit farther away from the conversion point. So you might want to give that a 5 or a 25. So this one there's a little bit of kind of gut checking in there. You want to look at how far away that action is from your ultimate conversion and assign those values accordingly. Another way that you can do this is to use $1 as your ultimate macro conversion value. And that's a nice tactic to use if you want to make it really clear to everyone involved that this is not real money. If you use $100, you might end up getting in the millions of dollars for the value of your site, and that can look like real money to stakeholders. So you can use $1, and then that will bring obviously your conversion values down. I like to use $100 just because I like the round numbers, but you can absolutely do this exact same method with $1 and then 25 cents, 75 cents, etc. Oops. So some do's and some don'ts before I turn it over to Claire to talk about investments. Do add values. So this is really important. We've talked a lot up until this point about the importance of establishing a measurement plan, and really there's nothing about that that's valuable until you actually add those values into your analytics events and goals. You're going to want to change your values as you get more data. Perfect is the enemy of good here. So you might not have exactly every value right away when you first start, or you might not know the exact drop off between a certain step. But as you get more data over time, you can change those values. And those values may naturally change over time. You might have a 50% enrollment drop off, and then the next quarter or the next school semester, it's down to 30%. So it's really about, taking a look at your data over time and changing it so it matches the real world. And lastly, as we mentioned, it's great if you can have the real actual value. That really helps, and that's really the only way to get your actual ROI. But even if you can't, setting up those representative values will help. Just a couple don'ts. Don't mix these methods. So if you mix the methods, it makes it really difficult to compare what's actually happening because you have some real values and some representative values. So you want to choose one or the other for your site and go with that. And as I mentioned, don't worry about making an educated guess. Really, we don't want to be perfect here. You have a lot of knowledge about your funnel and how it works, and you can make a guess on a certain step and get close enough and then change that as time goes on. So now I'm going to turn it over to Claire, and now that we've learned how to establish those values, she's going to show you how to use that plus your investment to calculate your ROI and ROAS.
All right, thank you. So yeah, Allison just walked us through how to calculate the value of different types of leads. And now I'm going to show you the other half of that equation, which is calculating the investment, so that really at the end of the day, we want to come to some sort of conclusion about your return on investment, or the ROI, or the return on ad spend, which we're going to call ROAS, to basically help you make positive changes based on what your analytics are telling you. So I'm going to start by showing what goes into measuring your investments. Then I'll show a couple ways to calculate the returns. And then finally, I'm going to share a couple interactive calculators with you that we're going to share links with you at the end of them. And those are going to help you do this same process for your own organization. So we really hope that those are helpful. So here's that funnel. This should look pretty familiar. Again, it's that audience segment of prospective students. It's all of the events and goals that they can interact with on their journey during their site visit or multiple visits, all of those steps toward becoming a qualified lead. And then finally, our ultimate conversion, which is enrollment. So Allison, of course, just showed us how to assign values to all of those different interactions. So now we're going to take that funnel up a level and assign values to all of the channels that sent those prospective students into your site in the first place, before they completed any events or goals, before they enrolled or anything like that. So for sake of example, I'm going to use some easy numbers, and we'll say that the total marketing budget for the year is $250,000. And of that 250, we'll say that 100 goes to paid search, 100 goes to direct mail, and then maybe the other 50 goes to email campaigns. That might be close to what you're doing, or you might have things allocated differently, but basically this is just going to help us get a couple solid examples. We also want to recognize that your users have more ways of finding you. We definitely want to acknowledge organic search, the power of referral traffic or links that are found on other sites. And you're going to see traffic from all of those different sources in the acquisitions tab of analytics. So those are definitely important. But for now, we're going to look at the paid channels and sources only, because that's a more direct way at getting at ROI. So yeah, your marketing mix might include other things like TV, radio, ads on Instagram or Facebook, sponsorships, other things that are going to add up into your total marketing budget. So keep those in mind as well as we go through these examples. So let's break out paid search and focus on that channel for a moment. This is a channel that, in our experience, most higher education organizations are using. It's also relatively easy to track, and that's because the channel itself, everything is pretty much self-contained within the digital space. So you can see the impressions from either the Google Ads or the Bing Ads platform. You can also see, the click-through rate, the cost per click, and then analytics is going to integrate with any of those sources to show you what those clicks did once they actually got to your site. So we're going to layer in the event and goal information from your analytics, and we can see the advertising costs for other actions too, like tour request event goals. We can see apply now clicks. We can see enrollments. So if we spent 100,000 on paid search to get 15,000 site visits, as you see here, right next to that top teal box, and 60 of those clicks end up enrolling at the end of the day, we can pretty safely say that we spent $100,000 to get 60 enrollments. So then this next section shows basically the costs for all of those different steps. So 667 is our cost per click, and that's going to be something you can find out within the ad platform itself. So within Google Ads, Bing Ads, etc. Then we can see, because there were 750 tour requests off of that media channel, each cost per lead we're going to say is 133. Then we have this CPQL, or cost per qualified lead, a hot lead, a close lead, whatever you want to call that one. It's different from just a lead, right? Because it's a lot closer, a lot more likely to that ultimate enrollment. So we're going to say 333 for that qualified lead cost. And then finally, we've got this acronym CPA, or cost per acquisition, which is going to be really important for the backwards math that we're going to do in a little bit. But basically that 1,667-ish is going to be our cost per acquisition. So Allison showed us how to calculate the value of each event and goal. And now let's look at the equation for return on ad spend, or ROAS. This might be familiar to some folks, but I know it's new for others. So we'll go through it from start to finish, and then afterward we'll go through ROI, which is a different calculation, but still helpful in its own way. So ROAS is a slightly simpler sort of equation than ROI. And to get to ROAS, you simply take the revenue or the value from all of the actions that ad source produced, and you're going to divide that by the total cost of the ad source in the first place. So I did just want to say one reminder that we're going off of those 60 enrollments, or the final action. We're not taking the value of all of the actions that led up to that ultimate conversion. So we know that paid search cost 100,000, and we know the paid search drove 60 enrollments. So we learned earlier to calculate that each enrollment is worth $20,000. Then showing the simple math, 60 times 20,000 is that 1.2 million. Divide that by 100,000 and we get a ROAS of 12. So ROAS is communicated in the form of a whole number, not a percentage. So it could be 1, it could be 1.2, or in this example case, it was 12, which is an awesome ROAS. And just like with ROI, the higher your return on ad spend, the better. Basically, anything that's a 1 or higher is going to be great. But it's up to you and your organization what your comfort level is in terms of how high you want your target ROAS to be. So now let's look at ROI. And we know that some organizations prefer to look at ROI. It's a little bit more common in business vernacular, and it's going to translate across departments a little bit better. But again, ROI stands for return on investment. And the main difference is that it's expressed in the form of a percentage rather than that whole number. So to get ROI, you take the revenue that you earned and subtract that initial investment and divide that number by the initial investment. So if the total revenue is that 60 times 20,000 or 1.2 million, we're going to do 1.2 million minus 100,000 divided by 100,000, which again is this extremely high ROI of 1,100%. So that's pretty good and may not be very realistic, but again, we're just using example numbers here. So the next example that we'll show is direct mail. And again, from that earlier chart, we were saying that for simplicity's sake, we're going to use $100,000 as our direct mail for the year. And direct mail tends to get a slightly lower website visit rate because people can't just click on a link. So they might have to remember what the brochure was all about when they do get online, or they might have to remember or type in a URL. They might just go like a lot of us do, which is I see direct mail for something. When I go to my computer, I'm going to actually use just the search bar and not type in the URL directly. And so we'll type in, or we'll talk about all of those different scenarios in a little bit. But basically what we want to cover is that direct mail might have different numbers over here than what we were talking about in paid search. Something to note though is that direct mail can be a lot farther down the funnel than something like paid search. So someone in paid search mode might be just doing general searches about you, and therefore you're going to get more clicks, but maybe they're going to be less likely to enroll. And for direct mail, you're thinking about somebody receiving this piece, and if they actually visit your site from this direct URL, they're probably pretty committed to learning more about your organization specifically, rather than just doing some general research. So then we can see some key differences with direct mail. So even though we spent 100,000 and got this 16 enrollments, we can just eyeball this and see, okay, our cost per acquisition was quite a bit higher over here. It's $6,250 compared to that, just under 1,700 number that we had for paid search. But we can still see that this is going to be a pretty high ROI and a pretty high ROAS. And just to take a quick pause here, we're talking about cost per lead, and then I said that caveat earlier of cost per qualified lead. We have numbers shown here in the $500 range, the $1,000 range, and that's going to sound really high for a cost per lead. But I did want to bring up this chart so you can see the sources down here. And again, this presentation is going to be shared with you in an email later. But education industry, and this is anywhere from public charter schools to private high schools. This could be higher education, really runs the gamut. But the education industry reports a $27 cost per lead. Now keep in mind, I'm going to go back a slide, that's going to be somewhere in between this site visits and tour requests, right? So it's not going to be a highly qualified lead. It's just going to be some sort of action that got them into this funnel in the first place. So that education is reporting a $27 again. And then this expected cost per lead by tactic, I think, is a lot more important. and a better one to look at. So this reports basically what the cost per lead should be for different tactics. And these all pretty much correspond to where that tactic falls in the kind of marketing funnel. So something that indicates that the user is really close to making a decision, or perhaps it's a big time investment for their research, is going to cost more basically for a cost per lead. And then something that's a little bit less of a requirement on their part, so SEO, maybe reading a blog post, looking at something in social media, or liking something on social media, those are going to be pretty low cost tactics when all things are considered. So gain and investment are not always easy to calculate, and Allison talked us through how to look at representative values and how to calculate percentages to make the gains a little bit easier. And I do just want to acknowledge the numbers that I just went through make this look really easy. We know that it's not an easy task, and that's why we're spending so much time on this. And honestly, why we broke this out into 3 parts is because it really does take time to analyze all the data and to get at these numbers. So you're probably thinking at this point, okay, this is great, but my marketing tactics are not this easy to track. And we totally get that. So here are some of the trickier types of returns. So things that might be hard to track. What if somebody comes to your site multiple times before they complete a conversion? And that happens a lot, especially in these categories and topics that take quite a bit of research. Somebody doesn't just say, I learned about this college or school for the very first time. I think I'm going to enroll right now, right? That doesn't really happen. So if they come to your site multiple times before a conversion, or what if they're coming in from non-digital sources, returns can be measured through the lifetime value cohort section within analytics. So that's a good section to look for within your dashboard. And that basically uses cookies on a user's computer and tells you, okay, this person came back 1, 2, 3, 4 times, but the original thing that brought them in was paid search or paid social or organic search. And those can help you attribute value over time. You can also track website visits spurred by non-digital tactics using special offer codes, or a shortened UTM code, or what's called a PURL, it's a personal or a personal URL. So basically a fancy URL that lets you see who's clicking on your ad and from what source. And those, again, those can be really useful on things like TV, YouTube ads, or even direct mail. If you want to highly encourage somebody to use that URL rather than doing that search method that I talked about before, tell them about an offer code. You know, if you use this special URL, you'll get $50 off or 10% off or whatever you can afford to do. So for those of you who listen to podcasts, I think this is one of the most helpful examples. They'll often use a PURL or an offer code to track things for their advertisers, to basically track back the value for them. So you'll see, go to hellofresh.com/podsaveamerica to redeem your $50 offer code, for example. So then HelloFresh knows that, a certain number of people came to their site specifically because of that ad on that podcast. So the last one, maybe hosting events was a big push for your marketing department this past year. Then the return can be measured by something a little bit softer. So maybe it's a satisfaction survey that you send out to people post-event, or donations received at the event. Maybe you see year over year slight increase in website traffic during the month when that event occurred, or something like that. So there are different ways to look at these numbers, and all of those are gonna help in the long run for calculating your ROI. So if you've invested in sponsorships, your investment is going to be the sponsorship cost plus any graphics produced, plus the time spent to negotiate those sponsorships. But your return can be measured by site visits, basically the day of that sponsorship, or again, with the use of an offer code. Okay, so now we're going to go to this calculating ROI slide, but this time we're going to do it for direct mail because the ROI for direct mail, again, is going to be more complicated and complex than what we saw for paid search. So the revenue is going to be all the conversions that resulted from, say, an offer code. And your investment might include all of the things that are listed here. So the planning, writing, and design time of your staff or contractors, right? It's going to also include photography rights, or maybe your organization has a huge bank of photography, and so that's not a cost for you. It's also going to include the printing costs and the postage. And usually when we look at that $100,000 investment in direct mail for the year, all that we're looking at is the printing costs and postage. So when we look at the ROI and the actual value of things, we're just taking that into account. And I would encourage you to really look at the time and the additional costs that can kind of sneak away from us to get toward a truer sense of ROI. That's going to hold true for things that look like they're free too. Things like search engine optimization is a way to get kind of free clicks because they're from organic search. But again, the investment includes a lot of time and energy and effort to secure the returns from that channel. So the direct mail ROI, if we use this calculation, I have an X with a question mark because we don't know the cost or the staff time that it takes for your organization to do this. But this is just an example to help you kind of look at how this would look in a way that's really helpful. Okay, so the next benefit of being able to calculate ROI and ROAS is that it's going to help you determine what budget you can safely set for the year. Or it can tell you what your existing budget can get you. And both of those can be really helpful in their own way. So I'm going to show you two online calculators that we've created to help you do each of those two things. The first one asks you what your annual budget is. You put in some key metrics to determine how many conversions you can get with that budget. And then the calculator basically tells you what your ROAS is going to be. The second one basically asks how many enrollments your organization needs to get in order to survive or thrive, depending on how you want to use the calculator. But once again, you enter those key metrics like the conversion rate that you know you're getting from your analytics, or the cost per click that you usually get from a given tactic. And then out comes the budget that's going to be required to hit that enrollments target. Okay, so this first one, our ROAS calculator, you'll get a link to this and the other calculator again right after the webinar is over. So what you'll do is you'll pick one tactic at a time, which is a helpful way to do it to make sure that your cost per click, conversion rate, things like that don't kind of cross streams. So let's use paid search here. So I'm going to enter in 100,000 because that was our 2019 budget for that tactic. The cost per click in this calculator is set to $25 because it's a kind of a good average for this industry and the tactic charts that we showed earlier, but you can click on that number to adjust it to whatever matches your own historical data. So I'm going to use 19 as my cost per click for a higher education Google search campaign. So I'll use that number. So the calculator, as you saw it change, is automatically going to give you the number of clicks that you can get from that budget with that cost per click. And then you can adjust the conversion rate to, again, what your Google Analytics events and goals are telling you should be the conversion rate for that channel. So let's say for all paid search visits, your conversion rate is 3%. And I'm using a conversion as an actual enrollment. So the calculator then shows you, okay, for $100,000, you will get 158 leads at a cost of $633 per qualified lead. And then here we have our estimated revenue and then the return on ad spend. Now I have this set as a $2,000 per acquisition. We were using 20 in our examples earlier, but this is basically a more universal calculator. So maybe you're looking at revenue from one course or an event or something else on campus. So we kept this pretty low just for the sake of example. And once you have access to these calculators, you can basically just reset it. It's going to go back to that $25 and 2% so that you can kind of start over. So the purpose of this calculator is really twofold. It'll show you what to realistically expect from your campaigns. So, if you're going to spend $100, this will show you, what you can afford to do or what optimizations you'll need to do in order to get a positive ROAS out of this campaign. It's also going to show you really the importance of continually monitoring and optimizing those ad campaigns to get that cost per click lower, to get the conversion rate higher. And those kinds of things are done through adjusting the ad copy, adjusting your placement and the targeting, all sorts of different changes we can make through our advertising targeting and creative to increase those numbers. So the next calculator is our how many leads calculator. So I'm going to click over to that one. So alternately, this calculator shows you how much budget you'll need to spend in order to get the conversions you need for a good ROAS. And a good ROAS would be determined by your organization. So some folks are going to have a comfort level of, a ROAS. As long as it's more than one, we're comfortable putting more budget into this tactic, where most organizations, or at least a lot of other organizations, want to see that margin be a little bit higher. So let's say you're promoting a one-time course, and at a minimum, you need to get 11 enrollments to run the course. So you'll see that budget just filled in automatically at $13,750 because at that cost per click of 25 and a conversion rate of 2%, that number works out to those 11 conversions. So let's experiment and see just what a really low cost per click would be, maybe $8. That gives us a ROAS of 5. That's awesome. But we know that most of the low-cost ad campaigns tend to not only have a low cost per click, but also have probably a lower conversion rate. So let's say, from all of the people that come in from this tactic, 0.2% of them, or sorry, 0.5% of them actually convert into enrolling for this course. Then we see probably a more realistic ROAS of 1.25. So we still highly encourage you to make use of this calculator on your own because, the example numbers that I can give are just that. They're just examples to show you how you could use this and apply this to your own organization. But doing this is going to help you really set accurate budgets and targets rather than relying on old numbers to set new goals. Okay, so to wrap us up, now that you have both sides of the equation and some calculator tools to help you measure ROAS and ROI, Allison is going to talk about some reporting tools that can make our lives as marketers a lot easier.
All right, so our discussion today was primarily about estimating the value of your on-site actions, determining your investment costs, and then using those numbers to determine the ROI or ROAS of your marketing efforts. But you're probably here for a reason, and you probably have stakeholders that you need to report to, and you need to be able to show them how you're actually doing. So we have a couple different ways to be able to report out to stakeholders. First off, there's manual reporting. And the nice thing about manual reporting is that it allows you to do it however you want. You can be as detailed or as not detailed as you want to be. It's not automatically very visual. You have to put some effort in there. And it can take a lot of work each time you want to report. So manual reporting is an option, but there are other more automated options out there. And our next option is just using the analytics reports that come straight out of Google Analytics. So These are great because they're fully automated. They can be emailed to your stakeholders on a regular basis. You can choose which stakeholders receive the report and at what intervals. But the downside is that these can be pretty complicated. They can contain a lot of data, and it's also not very easy to combine a lot of different types of reports together. You have to send a lot of different emails with a lot of different reports. Solving that problem is analytics dashboards. So analytics also has built-in dashboards that you can access in your account, and you can create essentially widgets which allow you to combine a lot of different types of report data. You can also email them to stakeholders on a regular basis. But the main thing that we don't like about these is that they're kind of higher level, and they're not that customizable because you're actually limited to a certain number of widgets per dashboard. So there's a limit to what you can do with these, but they are the most visual of these three methods, and they're the most high level for your stakeholders. So lastly, our recommended approach is Google Data Studio, and that's a free tool that pulls data directly from your Google Analytics. And you can really go as deep or as high level as you want on various topics. There's no limit to the number of widgets that you can incorporate. And the really nice thing is that you can brand it. You can customize it to exactly the needs of your stakeholders. You can use your brand colors, brand fonts, and you also can customize the date range in the upper right there. So you can send it to stakeholders once and they can choose any date range that their hearts desire. This is just showing one slide in a Data Studio dashboard, and you have an unlimited number of slides. So this one's focused on our acquisitions and our channel value. So you can see here that while organic search brings in the most number of users, it's actually not our highest value channel for this particular organization. Direct traffic is bringing in a higher value. So that's just one way of showing stakeholders how you're doing. And again, this is completely free and pulls in your analytics data automatically. So this brings us to the end of our webinar and our three-part series on getting the most value out of your analytics. Hopefully this has been really helpful for you and you have some new ideas to try out to get some insights in 2019. It looks like we have about a couple minutes for questions if anyone wants to ask any questions.
Okay, we have one question here. How often do you recommend reporting on analytics information? You know, that's gonna be probably specific to each of your organizations, but we would recommend being in there monthly to provide, you know, kind of in the weeds reporting, and at the very least, quarterly reporting. And maybe the more important question there is, who do you involve and who do you bring the reports to? That's the most important question, we believe, because when you get into the leadership levels of the higher ed places, those are the folks that need to know what the website is doing and or not doing for the organization in terms of enrollment numbers and how the marketing efforts are performing. So we'd encourage you to make sure you expose as high up as you can go in your approval chains to expose them to what the website is doing. Because many times that leadership level doesn't really understand what the website's doing for enrollment numbers. And exposing them to these types of reports really helps those folks understand what the website's doing. And if you need to make a request for a little more budget in a certain year to help certain sections of the website, you've got more of a case to make when you got that data behind you. So anyway, we encourage you to go as high up as you can in your leadership. Are there any other questions that we have?
Looks like we've got one here for how to find the real value of something that doesn't have a direct impact on enrollment. So that's a great question. As I mentioned, we encourage you to set real values if you can. And that's actually a place where I would recommend using a little bit of the methodology that I talked about for representative values. So you know that your ultimate enrollment value, let's say, is $20,000, and you've got an action that is just really far away from a conversion. It's something like sharing a news story or following you on a social channel, and it just doesn't directly correlate to your enrollment funnel. So what I would do there is I would set a very small percentage based on my kind of gut estimate as to how far away that is from the ultimate conversion. And I would then just do the simple math of saying, yep, okay, so that's 0.1% of our ultimate action, which is going to be, $20 in that case. Hopefully I did that math right on the fly. And it's okay to set a value to 0. We do that a lot of the time. If you have an event that's just designed to measure, say, the usability, if people are clicking on your menu or not, and you might just want to set that value to 0 because it doesn't have an impact ultimately on your enrollment goals or have a direct value to your organization, but you do want to know if people are using that, so you have an event set up for that. So that's a great question, and just take it down to a smaller value or even to 0.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. It's a little before 1 o'clock, so thanks a ton for attending. We really appreciate it. Remember that measurement is key. That's what this whole thing has been about. And we measure. Why do we measure? We measure to get better. That's really the reason, right? If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. We've been saying that in every one of these webinars. That's the importance and the benefit to this whole thing is by measuring it, you can then have a benchmark and a data point, and then you can hopefully improve upon that. So we encourage you to measure away in 2019. You'll get an email, as I'm sure you'll get an email that has a survey link. We'd love for you to fill out the survey. We love getting feedback. If there's any other topics or content you'd like to see presented in this fashion. Also, if there's just a way we can improve what we did over these last 3 webinars, we'd love to hear it. So thanks a ton for your time. Have an awesome 2019, and maybe we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks.